The sun hung low over the bustling market of Valparaiso, casting golden hues over the cobbled streets. The scent of grilled seafood and freshly brewed coffee filled the air as Tracy wandered between colorful stalls, her eyes wide with curiosity. She had always loved the thrill of solo travel, the freedom, the unexpected encounters, the stories waiting to unfold. She stopped at a small vendor selling hand-woven scarves, running her fingers over the intricate patterns. Just as she reached for her wallet, another hand moved toward the same scarf. "Looks like we have the same taste," a voice said with a chuckle. Tracy turned and met the warm gaze of a man about her age, his blonde hair slightly tousled by the ocean breeze. He wore a well-worn backpack, the kind that had seen countless adventures. "Seems like it," she replied with a grin, "but I saw it first." The man smirked and raised his hands in surrender. "Fair enough. I'm Tim, by the way." "Tracy." She handed the vendor a few Chilean pesos, securing her prize. Tim nodded toward a nearby cafe. "How about a coffee?" As a consolation for losing the scarf. She hesitated for only a moment before nodding. After all, travel was about moments like this. Spontaneous, fleeting, and full of possibilities. The afternoon stretched into evening as they wandered through the vibrant streets of Valparaiso. They hopped on the city's old funiculars, marveling at the hillside houses painted in brilliant blues, reds, and yellows. They shared stories, Tim's trek through Patagonia, Tracy's sunrise hike in Machu Picchu. They laughed over their failed attempts at Spanish and debated which South American city had the best street food. At sunset, they found themselves standing by the edge of the Pacific Ocean, the waves crashing gently against the shore. "This has been unexpectedly great," Tracy admitted, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Tim smiled. "Yeah, one of those rare, perfect days." A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable but filled with the unspoken understanding that this moment wouldn't last. "I should probably head back," Tracy finally said. "Early bus tomorrow." Tim nodded. "Yeah, me too." For a second, she thought about asking for his number, his email, anything to stay in touch. But something about the fleeting magic of the day made her hesitate. Maybe it was meant to be just this, a perfect memory. "Take care, Tracy." "You too, Tim." And just like that, they walked in opposite directions, disappearing into the night. Cuenca was everything Tracy had imagined. Cobblestone streets lined with colonial buildings, flower-filled plazas buzzing with life, and the distant sound of church bells echoing through the crisp mountain air. As she stepped out of the bus station, a cool breeze rustled her jacket, a stark contrast to the humid coast of Chile. Dragging her backpack along, she made her way to a small family-run hotel near the city center. The lobby smelled of fresh coffee and old wood, and a friendly woman at the front desk handed her a key. "Room 12. Breakfast starts at 7. Tracy thanked her and climbed the narrow staircase. As she unlocked her door, a fleeting memory surfaced. Tim had mentioned Cuenca. "I might go there next," he had said, stirring his coffee back in Valparaiso. "I hear the old town is amazing." Her heart gave a small, unexpected jolt. Could he be here now? She shook off the thought. South America was vast. Travelers changed plans all the time. The idea of running into him again in a city of thousands was too unlikely. Still, as she wandered through the streets that afternoon, she found herself scanning the faces in the crowd. At cafes, in markets, near the Riverwalk. She told herself she wasn't looking for him, but each time a blonde-haired man passed by, she felt a flicker of hope. Meanwhile, miles away, Tim sat on a bus heading north. He had arrived in Cuenca 2 days earlier, walking the same streets Tracy now explored, sitting in the same plazas, even stopping by the same hotel where she now stayed. But without any way to contact her, he had given up on the idea of seeing her again. As the bus rumbled toward the Ecuadorian highlands, he leaned his head against the window, watching the landscape blur past. He hadn't expected to think about Tracy this much. Their day together had been brief, but something about it lingered. An unfinished sentence, a story left incomplete. If only he had waited a little longer. That evening, Tracy sat in a quiet cafe, absently stirring her tea as she watched the rain drizzle outside. A couple nearby laughed over a shared dessert, their easy companionship making her chest tighten unexpectedly. Maybe she should have asked for his contact after all. Maybe some moments weren't meant to be left to fate. As the thought settled in her mind, a new determination sparked within her. If their paths had nearly crossed once, maybe, just maybe, she could do something about it. The idea came to Tracy just before sunrise. She lay awake in her small hotel room, staring at the ceiling, the sound of early morning rain tapping against the window. If she had already missed him once, she didn't want to leave things to chance again. She sat up, turned on the bedside lamp, and tore a page from her travel notebook. Tim, if you're in Cuenca, or if you ever come through, I hope you see this. I'd love to reconnect. I'll be staying here for the next 2 days. Maybe fate will give us a second chance. Tracy. She hesitated before signing her name, then underlined it once, as if to make her presence here more certain, more real. Rolling the note in her fingers, she took a deep breath, slipped on her jacket, and made her way downstairs. The rain had stopped by the time she reached the hotel Tim had mentioned back in Valparaiso. It was a charming colonial-style inn with a blue wooden door and a hanging plant that dripped with raindrops. Her heart pounded as she pressed the note onto the door with a strip of tape she had borrowed from the front desk. With one last glance, she turned and walked away, the morning sun breaking through the clouds as she stepped onto the cobblestone streets. Now all she could do was wait. The day stretched long. Tracy explored Cuenca with half her mind elsewhere, checking her phone even though she knew Tim had no way to contact her. She visited the sprawling flower market, walked along the Rio Tomebamba, and even stopped by a bookstore, running her fingers along the spines of travel memoirs, wondering if their story would be worth telling someday. By the time the sun dipped below the terracotta rooftops, she had almost convinced herself the note wouldn't be seen. But when she returned to her hotel that evening, something was different. Her heart lurched when she saw it, a folded slip of paper tucked beneath the door to her room. With trembling fingers, she picked it up and unfolded it. Tracy, I can't believe you actually left a note. I thought I had missed my chance. I'm at La Nube Cafe, just a few streets from here. I'll wait. Tim. She didn't stop to think. Grabbing her jacket, she rushed out the door, her feet barely touching the cobblestones as she ran toward the cafe, a smile breaking across her face. Some moments weren't meant to be left to fate. Some were meant to be chased. Tracy spotted Tim before she even stepped inside La Nube Cafe. He was sitting by the window, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug, his gaze lost in thought. For a split second she hesitated. What if this reunion wasn't as magical as she had imagined? What if the spark had only existed in Valparaiso, in that single fleeting day? Then, as if sensing her presence, Tim looked up. His expression shifted from surprise to something softer, relief, maybe even joy. He stood, and before either of them could overthink it, they embraced, the warmth of familiarity wrapping around them like a well-worn jacket. You actually left a note, he said, pulling back just enough to see her face. And you actually found it. They laughed, a quiet shared sound between them, as if the universe had decided to give them a second chance. The decision to travel together wasn't made in one grand moment. It happened over cups of coffee and conversations about places they had yet to see. I was planning on heading to Peru, Tim mentioned one evening, tracing a route on a map spread between them. Tracy leaned closer. So was I. The words lingered between them. They could have taken it as coincidence, let it pass like another missed connection. But this time they didn't. And so they set off, together. Peru greeted them with the crisp mountain air of Huaraz, where they hiked through the Cordillera Blanca, standing breathless before the turquoise waters of Laguna 69. The altitude sickness hit them both hard, and they took turns laughing at their own dizziness, supporting each other as they adjusted to the thin air. In Bolivia, they braved the Uyuni salt flats, where the sky and earth became one endless mirror. They danced on the reflective surface, their silhouettes blending into the clouds. One night, as they lay beneath the Milky Way, Tim turned to her and whispered, "Do you ever feel like some things are just meant to be?" Tracy didn't answer right away. She just reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. By the time they reached the Amazon, their connection had deepened beyond words. They rafted through roaring rapids, the thrill of adventure pushing them closer. They shared stories under mosquito nets, their whispered conversations blending with the hum of the jungle. Each challenge, missed buses, lost passports, food poisoning, only made them stronger. They learned each other's habits, the way Tim tapped his fingers when he was thinking, the way Tracy scrunched her nose when she was about to disagree. They weren't just travelers anymore. They were a team. And somewhere along the way, between the peaks of the Andes and the depths of the rainforest, they stopped wondering if this was just another chapter in their journey. It had become the story itself. The end of a journey always came with a strange mix of emotions: excitement for what lay ahead, nostalgia for what was being left behind. Tracy and Tim sat side by side on a quiet beach in southern Chile, their footprints trailing behind them in the damp sand. The waves rolled in softly, the evening sky painted in streaks of orange and pink. "We've been on the road for almost 6 months," Tim murmured, tossing a pebble into the sea. Tracy hugged her knees to her chest. "Feels like longer, and also like no time at all." He turned to her, his gaze steady. What next? The question had lingered between them for weeks, unspoken but ever present. There was no more list of cities to visit, no more hostels to check into, no more maps to unfold on cafe tables. They had reached the edge of their adventure. Except, Tracy realized, the adventure wasn't what mattered anymore. She looked at Tim, really looked at him. The sun had deepened his tan, and his hair had grown a little longer. She knew every expression on his face, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his dreams, the way he instinctively reached for her hand in crowded streets. "This doesn't have to end," she said, her voice quiet but certain. Tim smiled, slow and knowing. "No, it doesn't." They had met as travelers, bound by a shared love of the unknown. But somewhere along the way, their story had shifted. The journey had stopped being about the places they went, and had become about who they went with. They didn't need a map to tell them where to go next. They had already found home, in each other.